So I'm Tracy Ochester. I'm a psychologist, and I'm also a certified mindfulness-based cognitive therapy teacher and a registered yoga teacher. And we're going to talk to you today about mindfulness-based programs, which are programs grounded in mindfulness that are supported by the research. And they're designed to help people with common causes of human suffering. And all of them are designed just a little bit differently to meet different kinds of needs. We're all associated with an organization called the Midwest Alliance for Mindfulness, and we're Kansas City's premier secular mindfulness and meditation center. We've been fortunate to have a number of religious-based mindfulness centers in Kansas City, but never have we had a secular one. So we hope we're filling that role in this city. So Midwest Alliance for Mindfulness came together in an effort to help build awareness about the healing aspects of mindfulness here in the Midwest. It's something that's been around for quite a while on the coasts, but we always get things a little bit later than the coasts do. So it's just starting to take off here in the center of the country. And we wanted to help people have practices that they could use to build compassion, a sense of well-being, a sense of peace. And through our own personal practices, we can allow those benefits to ripple out into our community and beyond. And so we really envision a kinder, more peaceful and compassionate world. We don't have any big ideas or anything like that. So mindfulness, if you haven't heard the word, you probably all have. How many of you have heard the word mindfulness? Yeah, it's out there. It really is kind of a way of being. There are practices that we can practice to become more mindful, but ultimately it becomes a way that we live our lives. And it's on purpose, paying attention in a non-judgmental way for greater presence, so that we can really be embodied in our lives, so we can experience things fully, rather than moving around on autopilot like we do so many times, and how living on autopilot can really cause us to miss important information that could be helpful for us to make wise decisions. So our organization offers a number of classes and community meetings, all kinds of programming to help people cultivate the qualities of mindfulness. Mindfulness-based programs are really near and dear to our hearts, because they're really designed for people who are experiencing significant suffering. And we know there's a lot of that in the world, right? All you have to do is turn on the news or open up your Facebook feed, and you can see all kinds of painful things that people are experiencing. These programs are informed by medicine, as well as by contemplative traditions, by science, by psychology, and by education. It's the best of all worlds kind of rolled together in one. And these programs, while they're therapeutic, they're not considered therapy per se. So they're not meant to replace treatment, but to complement treatment. These mindfulness-based programs help people develop a new relationship with their experience. This is characterized by present moment focus, by decentering, meaning not being so caught up in your experience, and by taking an approach rather than an avoidance orientation. So when we experience suffering, often our instinct is to push away from that, right? And there's a lot of information about our experience that we may miss. These programs help us learn how to welcome everything in, the joys and the painful experiences, so that we can respond with better wisdom. All of these programs they're very experiential. They're not like your college classes or your high school classes where somebody stands up and lectures to you, but you're learning and engaging in practices. And then they also incorporate some kinds of exercises from other traditions, things like yoga, different forms of therapy. We take some of those skills and weave them into the practices. The elements of each curriculum are specially tailored for different populations, and specialized training is required to be able to teach them. So all of these teachers that you see here today, they're all going to be introducing themselves to you. specialize in various MBPs. They're going to be explaining to you the various programs and offering you a sample practice. That's why you had to sign your waivers today, so that you can get a taste of the, what each program is like, and maybe it will help you decide what might be useful to you, or if you work with people, what might be useful to your clients. If you need to use the restroom in the middle of the session, just know that we don't have one here in the suite. You'll need to go through the center lobby here, go out into the atrium, and go to the right for the women's and the men's. The women's is on the right of the hallway, the men's is on the left. And the middle door locks, so be sure you just leave it ajar until you come back and you can pull it closed again. The middle lobby is a quiet zone because we have people that are working individually with people in the various offices. So we ask that you take your conversation into the lobby or out into the atrium or in this room. There's also a little break room back there where you can get water if you run out of water. We're going to take a break about halfway through, so we won't make you sit for 2 hours without stretching or using the bathroom. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to talk a little bit about mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness and stress reduction specifically for men.
My name is Eric Holtz, one of the mindfulness teachers and coaches here at MAM. I teach community practice classes and weekly mindfulness attitude classes, and also a practice group for first responders. I'm a retired police officer. I was a cop in Overland Park for 25 years, retired a few years ago, and that's when my mindfulness journey started really in earnest. After I retired, I think there was a fairly immediate relief in some of the stressors that I dealt with in police work, but it didn't all go away after 25 years. So I began to meditate and pick up a mindfulness practice. About 3 years later, I discovered this wonderful organization and all of these people and these opportunities to deepen my own practice and to begin teaching it. So, like I said, one of the classes that I lead is a weekly practice group just for first responders. So that would be active and retired police officers, firefighters, EMTs, dispatchers, and military folks. So before I talk about MBSR, I thought I'd do a short practice with you. So once again, if you haven't meditated, it's just about finding a posture that sort of balances comfort and alertness. It's good enough. Eyes closed or softened, whatever's most comfortable. And we'll just begin by attending to the breath. John Kabat-Zinn, who created mindfulness-based stress reduction, which we'll talk about here in a moment, always said that as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than there is wrong. So we're all breathing. Let's just watch that breath without doing anything to it, without judging it, just simply allowing the in-breath and the out-breath to do what they always do, naturally, comfortably. Simply noticing it. It might be more noticeable to you at the nostrils, in the rising and falling of the chest or the belly. Simply engaging in this focused breathing for a moment. You may have already noticed that thoughts intervene, unannounced and unbidden, and that's fine. We simply watch them come and go as they will anyway, without judging the thoughts, without judging ourselves for having the thoughts. Now maybe shifting awareness to the entire body, from head to toe, just being present with the body, noticing any sensations that arise, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Perhaps you feel relaxation in some area, maybe some tension, some discomfort. Simply being with and observing those experiences for a moment. And finally, shifting awareness to the thoughts without becoming attached to them as they arise or getting wrapped up in them, simply noticing them. Perhaps as clouds passing by in the sky, noticing them as they arrive, observing them as they play out, not making any effort to push them away or cling to them. Just remaining with the thoughts for a moment. At the sound of the bell, slowly and gently open our eyes and release the practice. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about MBSR, Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction, which is one of the courses we teach here at MAM. It was created exactly 40 years ago by John Kabat-Zinn. If you haven't heard of him, anybody here not heard of John Kabat-Zinn? Good. So I can tell his story just a little bit. 40 years ago, this gentleman he'd been studying Zen Buddhism. One of his teachers was Thich Nhat Hanh. You've heard of that person. He was teaching yoga, and he was earning a PhD in molecular biology from MIT, so a pretty accomplished person. And when he started working at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, which is where I've received my MBSR training, he discovered that many patients at UMass Medical School who were being treated for a spectrum of emotional and physical ailments were still suffering acutely as a result of their pain, and their doctors were frustrated with their lack of capacity to really help them as much as they wanted to. So John came up with this idea during a retreat, actually, to create this sort of alchemy, or this combination of modalities involving mindfulness training, formal and informal mindfulness training from the wisdom traditions that he was familiar with, and yoga, mindful movement, science, psychology, and Western medicine, and asked these doctors to refer their patients to him. And so in the basement of UMass Medical School, they concocted this place called the Stress Clinic, and for years and years, John put together this program, which ultimately became MBSR, to treat these patients. And being a scientist, he began studying the results of this training from the very beginning. And so 40 years now on, MBSR has sort of become the font or the wellspring from which a lot of mindfulness-based training and education comes. In 1993, Bill Moyers came calling with a documentary to talk to John Kabat-Zinn and see what he was doing within the stress clinic. And by then he had seen thousands and thousands of patients. And like one of his senior teachers, Bob Stahl, says, the phone started ringing and it never stopped. And so from 1993, individuals who sought the healing benefits of MBSR, as well as institutions, hospitals, and schools, and now the military and law enforcement and all sorts of secular institutions, embraced MBSR as this way of of healing for individuals and organizations. So we're teaching MBSR in exactly the same way that it's been formulated originally by John Kabat-Zinn, although with a good deal of flexibility. Tracy talked about the embodied sense of mindfulness training and the mindfulness experience. And so within this 8-week period of time within which we teach MBSR once a week, a couple of hours, one night a week, and then a half-day silent teacher-led retreat towards the end of the 8-week period of time, we explore, discuss, and practice this panoply or this spectrum of mindfulness-based practices, from formal mindfulness practices, so all of the different ways in which one can meditate, walking, standing, seating, lying down, body scans, what we often refer to as the on-the-cushion mindfulness practices, as well as informal mindfulness practices. So if you think about it, even if you're a very faithful daily meditator, your on-the-cushion time, sort of your deep dive into mindfulness, is only some number of minutes every single day, and yet you have to get off the cushion eventually and go to work and tend to the children in the home and everything else. So mindfulness doesn't ignore that and gives us many, many opportunities throughout the day to be mindful intentionally. There's a saying in mindfulness that it's easier to be mindful than it is to remember to be mindful. And so for everyone in this room who's already very, very good at some number of skills, you probably can think back to when you needed to be more intentional about your practice so that you could hone your skills and your abilities. And so we work very hard throughout the 8-week process to help people do that, so that they gain the benefits of working with a teacher and with a group of like-minded individuals towards a certain goal or objective, if you will, but also to leave that 8-week experience with this toolbox of ways in which they can deepen their practice. And then of course MAM exists to be that place where at any given time folks can return on a weekly or however often they want to continue to work on their mindfulness practice. Sort of pivot from MBSR to something that Dr. Sydney Spears and I are conspiring on or working on. Beginning in October 1st, we're going to offer a 8-week program for mindfulness stress reduction for men, or those who identify as men. It will borrow largely from the MBSR curriculum, and will combine aspects of mindful self-compassion, which Sydney's going to talk about here shortly, as well as emotional intelligence, which that may sound familiar to you. It's a book written in 1996 by Daniel Goleman, based on some research around how we can cultivate self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy and social skills and things like that. So it's very much a perfectly logical analog to or complement to MBSR. That'll be 8 weeks with the half-day retreat as well, but focusing on what it feels like and what it is to be identified as a male in contemporary society. Historically and traditionally, men tend to be less willing, less interested in diving into those sorts of things. I think the proliferation of mindfulness training in the United States, especially insofar as it relates to law enforcement organizations, traditionally male-dominated organizations in the military, is very good evidence that things are starting to change, and men are starting to recognize the degree to which watching their own minds for a while and seeing the degree to which their minds cause their own suffering is very, very beneficial. So I'm very happy to be involved in that as well. So if MBSR sounds interesting or useful to you, we have a color-coded chart here. You can take a look and see whether or not it would be appropriate for you or for somebody that you care about. The mindfulness stress reduction class for men. If you're a man or know a man who you think might be interested, please point them our way. And similarly, if you know anyone who's a first responder, and we tend to define first responder relatively broadly. It's a fairly long list of folks who tend to be exposed to firsthand to the kinds of trauma that can really cause a good deal of crisis in their life. Again, we'd invite you to send them to our Facebook page, to our web page. To me personally, we'd be more than happy to introduce them to those courses. So with that, we'll go ahead and end with one more practice. That first one was just sort of a check-in that you might experience at any community practice class or an MBSR, just a process by which we either bring awareness to our breath or any one or more of our other sensations, which tend to be always there, whether we want them to be or not, and a good anchor for us to explore mindfulness. This last one is by Joan Halifax, who started and operates the Zen Center the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and a wonderful mindfulness teacher. It's sort of more along the lines of self-compassion. She calls it a deep connection meditation. So again, finding that comfortable, alert posture, eyes open or closed, hands wherever they're most comfortable, maybe taking a deep breath and recentering. Really dropping into the physical body. All of mindfulness training really is entirely predicated on an embodied sense. Maybe on the next exhale, consciously allowing yourself to send your out breath to someone you really care about. Touching into this deep aspiration that all beings, all things, including ourselves, wish to be free from suffering. I want you to recall a time when you felt deeply perceived, when someone sat with you or offered you a glance or did something for you where you really felt met, you felt seen, appreciated, cared for, and not judged. It could be your dog who's so happy to see you come home, or your grandchild who holds up her arms waiting to be lifted into the air. It could be a caregiver who just came alongside you, didn't really require anything from you, just accepted the whole situation. See if you can imagine what it feels like physically, in the heart, emotionally, to be met. And even if there's some kind of resistance, some kind of skepticism or unpleasantness when you're asked to do this, perhaps imagine turning toward that tightness with patience and with kindness. If this feeling has a nourishing quality, you can recognize it in one way as always being present for you, even though sometimes not always very accessible, and as a resource that you can draw upon in the moment when you felt really seen or perceived or appreciated. Also allows us to become familiar with what others might experience as you offer them loving kindness. Spending another moment in this brief contemplation, whatever benefit you may experience, and just dropping into the space of basic goodness, maybe offering it to another, perhaps that person who perceived you, perhaps someone who is really struggling who could use a little blessing.
Thanks, Eric. The programs I'm going to talk about actually were both derived from MBSR. So I'm so glad Eric gave a great background about MBSR. In fact, many of the mindfulness-based programs, if not all of them, were inspired by John Kabat-Zinn's work. And I'm going to be talking about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and mindfulness-based relapse prevention. Both are derivations, offshoots of MBSR. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy I've been offering since 2015. When I first started offering it, I didn't have a room like this. So I had to find spaces, and I would rent yoga studios and wherever I could that had a nice big space. But now we meet here in this dedicated space. We have a great courtyard so we can go outside for practices that involve movement. We have a nice break room where we can keep our food from mindful eating, so it feels quite luxurious now. But I've been able to experience the changes over the years as I've been offering it longer and longer. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy was designed for people who suffer from chronic depression. And it combines the practices of mindfulness with some of the skills of cognitive behavior therapy. And it was designed by Williams, Teasdale, and Siegel. They've written several books. If you're curious, they even have a workbook out that you can look at. And the research has shown that it reduces the relapse of depression just as effectively as long-term medication use for many people. I always tell people, don't, get the idea that means, oh, I need to quit my medicine, take MBCT. It's, statistically speaking, we found that it's also very complementary if you are using antidepressants. It's very complementary to that. But for many people, it's really important because maybe they can't take medicines, maybe they have a bad reaction, or for whatever reason they don't want to take medicines. It offers them another possibility. So let's do a little practice. If you want to kind of get a posture that's alert, yet fairly relaxed. And you're welcome to close down your eyes or find a soft gazing point somewhere out in front of you. We're going to do a practice called the 3-minute breathing space. It's kind of the signature practice of MBCT, and you might be thrilled to hear you can do the practice in 3 minutes. And it can be used whenever you find that your mood might be spiraling down, that your emotions are getting the best of you. And you start by just becoming aware of your inner experience. Maybe asking yourself, what's happening inside me right now? What thoughts are here? What emotions are present? Just turning towards your experience, not pushing anything away. Noticing what's happening in the body. If there's any tightness, or clenching. This first minute is just for tuning in to note what's here. And so having a sense for what's going on right now inside you, having stepped out of the automatic pilot that we so often find ourselves living in, the next step is to gather your awareness by focusing in on a single point. And we might choose the physical sensations of breathing in the body. centering your attention on that place in your body where you notice the breath most prominently. But if the breath isn't an appropriate anchor for you, you can always choose something that feels a little safer, maybe the feeling of your body on the cushion, or your hands resting together on your knees. If you're sitting on a chair, the feeling of your feet, the soles of your feet on the floor. If you're observing your breath, doing your best to follow it in and out. Just being with it as you give it your bare attention. Focus as an anchor to the present. Now the final step is to allow your awareness to expand to the entire body. Letting the breath be present but in the background as you notice your entire body from head to toe and whatever's arising there. And if there are any sensations of discomfort or tension or resistance, seeing if you can bring your awareness there on an in-breath and maybe softening a little, opening a little on an out-breath. And just resting in this more spacious awareness of your experience until you hear the sound of the bell and release the practice. So that's a practice I call kind of a pocket practice, because you can take it with you wherever you go. You don't have to be sitting on a cushion. You don't have to be in a special place to be able to use it. In fact, it's most effective if you can use it in the moment when you're noticing some discomfort happening inside. So we'll move to mindfulness-based relapse prevention. This was created by Sarah Bowen, an offshoot of MBSR, to help people who are already in recovery from drug and alcohol addictions to maintain their recovery. So this program isn't really appropriate for people who haven't been through substance abuse treatment before. Really, it's for people who have already completed initial substance abuse treatment and are just looking for tools to help support them. So there's good evidence in the research that it does improve, it does reduce relapse rates for people who practice. And it brings in the mindfulness practices as well as the relapse prevention strategies from Alan Marlott. So it has that cognitive behavioral aspect to it as well. So it teaches people through mindful awareness to understand their triggers and their habitual patterns, the risk factors that create urges for them, also internal signatures that happen around relapse, to be able to notice this early and to intervene in a caring way before we get so far down the spiral that we're unable to prevent relapse. So we learn to observe our moment-by-moment experience, including the discomfort of cravings and urges. And we learn how to engage with ourselves so that we feel more empowered, so that we don't feel pulled around by our urges and cravings. Both of these programs, MBCT and MBRP, have been discovered to help with a wider range of populations than we originally thought that they were designed for. So MBCT is also very useful for people with anxiety. In fact, I've even had a number of people in my MBCT classes who have pretty severe obsessive compulsive disorder and have found it useful. And MBRP is also useful for other kinds of cravings. Any of the kinds of urges that drive us to react in ways that are useful to us in everyday life. Sometimes we call these addictions. They may not really be addictions, and we don't always have to identify ourselves as a person with an addiction to find ourselves subject to cravings and urges. So they find that it's helpful with things like overeating, smoking, gambling, all kinds of things that we might find ourselves drawn to. There's even some initial experimentation with internet addiction. So it's exciting stuff, and mindfulness isn't a panacea, but it certainly can be a useful tool with lots of the things that cause us difficulty in our lives. Let's do a kind of an interesting little practice that comes from MBRP called urge surfing. So in this practice, I'm going to invite you to picture for yourself some kind of situation in your life that you find challenging, one that you find yourself maybe reacting in kind of a way that you don't feel great about. So some kind of situation where you feel really pulled, like you feel sort of out of control and you feel pulled in a direction that's not in alignment with your values. Please don't choose the most challenging situation for this practice. Choose something that is maybe a good for a beginner. Practice some compassion with yourself. Even though you might choose something that's not so overwhelming, still something overwhelming may come up. And if that happens, please allow yourself to open your eyes or move around or connect with your breath, whatever you need to do to kind of shift out of that and maybe reselect something that's a little more manageable. So this could be something that is a problem now, or it could be something that you can just imagine causing you difficulty in the future. It might involve a triggering person, it might involve triggering places, or triggering objects or items. During this meditation, I'm going to ask you not to engage in the usual reactive behavior that you engage in, but rather be with the urges and discomfort that come up when you imagine the situation. And you're encouraged to respect your limits in this. So, does everybody have a little something in mind? If not, take a couple of seconds to bring something to mind. And when you have something in mind, you might signal that by lowering your eyes. So we'll move into a meditation. First, noticing your body here in the seat. Letting the breath flow easily and naturally. Just allowing yourself to be here, be present. And when you're ready, bringing your chosen scenario to mind. Remembering that in this scenario, you're going to make the choice not to engage in whatever reactive behavior that it triggers for you. So taking a few moments to really picture yourself in that place or situation. Or if you're not a visualizer, really just getting a felt sense of yourself there. There are people involved, imagining the people, and all the events that lead up to this reactivity. And as best you can, bring yourself right to the point where you feel triggered, as though you might behave reactively. And when you're there, we're just going to pause here for a moment. We tend to fall into our cravings or fight against them. But here we're just going to explore them. We're going to find some balance and just stay with observing the experience rather than fighting or reacting automatically. So you might begin by noticing any emotions that are here. Maybe naming them, labeling them. Noticing the thoughts that are going through your mind. And what physical sensations are you experiencing? What does it feel like in your body? And noticing what is it about this situation that seems intolerable. Can you stay with it and just be gentle with yourself? If you begin to feel overwhelmed at any point, you can just back off a bit by allowing your eyes to open or letting your attention come back to your breathing. Remember that we're practicing staying with this experience in a kind and curious way. We're making the choice not to act on the urges and cravings that are arising, just staying with them and observing them. Noticing what's happening in your body and mind. Really getting to understand what a craving or an urge feels like. Without tightening around it, without resisting it. Discovering what happens when you stay with the experience and explore it a little. What is it that you're truly needing underneath it all? What do you really need? Maybe there's a longing for something. Maybe there's some fear or anger or loneliness. Maybe there's a desire for freedom. What is it that you really need right now? And if the craving or urge becomes increasingly intense, you might imagine it like an ocean wave. And imagine that you're riding that wave, using your breath as a surfboard to stay steady. And your job is to ride the wave of desire from its beginning, and as it grows, staying right with it, through its peak of intensity, and then keeping your balance while you're riding the wave. Noticing how you can simply stay present with this wave instead of immediately reacting to it. Just accepting the craving, staying with it without giving into it, without having to make it go away. Now, taking the time you need, just letting go of the scenario that you've imagined, slowly and gently bringing your attention back to your breathing, back to some safe place in your body. You can take a deep breath if you'd like filling in the lungs and emptying completely. Maybe making some small movements in your body, gradually opening your eyes and letting the room come back into focus.
My name is Sydney Spears, and I'm one of the MAM instructors. I have been teaching several different classes, including the two that I will talk about today. One is called Yoga Nidra Eye Rest. Has anybody ever heard of Yoga Nidra in here? Okay, a couple of people. How many people in here actually go to yoga classes? I was just curious. Okay. And then the other particular mindfulness-based program I'm going to talk about is mindful self-compassion. I am a clinical social worker, and I love doing social work. I do it in lots of different capacities, including here at MAM too. So to start out with, I'd like to give you just kind of a summary of Yoga Nidra, and in particular, eye rest. Has anybody ever taken Yoga Nidra or no? Okay, great. Well, Yoga Nidra is not like the typical yoga class for those of you who have taken yoga, because typically when we think of yoga, we think of moving in and out of different postures, right? Or even if you don't take yoga, for most people, that's kind of their concept. Well, Yoga Nidra is an Eastern ancient practice, meditative practice, that is more like one part of yoga, and that is beginning relaxation for those people who have taken that, and ending relaxation. So it's about turning on your relaxation response. So in Yoga Nidra, which is an ancient form of yoga and meditation, you are typically lying down. Not everybody. Some people will sit in a chair. Some people can even stand up for that matter, or you might be seated. But generally you want to place your body in a particular form or posture that is as relaxing as possible, because that's part of the practice. Part of this meditative, deep meditative practice is to increase your relaxation response. So the more that you can allow your muscles to relax and release in a more restorative form, the more that you may be able to release some of your thinking. So I'll say more about that in a bit. So there's that particular type of meditative practice that's guided. It's Yoga Nidra, relaxed form, and it is in a state to be able to help you be mindful in different ways. But then there's another one that has evolved over the years, another form of Yoga Nidra, and that's called I rest. So it's I and then the word rest. And it stands for integrative restoration. And that was founded by a clinical psychologist, a spiritual teacher. His name is Richard Miller. And he was really interested in working with veterans who had experienced trauma, who were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And then as a result of that, he developed this particular type of practice, this spin-off of Yoga Nidra, the ancient form, and he modernized it, he secularized it for people who were struggling with PTSD. But he found in his research that it was not just helpful for people with PTSD, it was also helpful for people on the stress continuum with chronic stress, with anxiety, with depression. Many people who deal with trauma and stress problems, issues, they can't sleep, they deal with a lot of insomnia. So he found that this particular modernized version of Yoga Nidra, the ancient form, was helpful for those people too. So you don't just have to have, PTSD in order to get some possible benefits from iRest Yoga Nidra. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I just wanted to explain that because there are some classes. In fact, Tracy teaches a class here in Yoga Nidra that is very, very similar, but there are some differences with the iRest, the modern version. Another one of the features of iRest Yoga Nidra is that it is trauma sensitive because of what Dr. Miller had researched and the people he had dealt with who had experienced trauma. There's a protocol, there's a 10-step protocol within iRest Yoga Nidra, and part of it is to develop inner resources and to be real sensitive to people's safety when they're going through the practices. So another thing I wanted to tell you that's really, really important about iRest Yoga Nidra is it tends to be, in most cases, a longer guided meditation. So it's not just 5 minutes in general. Not saying you can't practice it that way, you could, but when you take an 8-week session, it typically is between 45 minutes or an hour of lying down, sitting, etc. And that's why a lot of people choose to lie down. Like on a yoga mat, you might be in a restorative form. People use props, for example. They use blankets because, again, the idea is to really allow your body to relax. The more that you can allow your body and your musculature to relax, the more that for some people, you can also allow your mind to relax. So when it comes to the particular practice, because you are lying down or seated so long, for many people, they tend to get to, because again, with the guided meditation, they tend to get to this state between wakefulness and sleep. So they're not exactly sleep, but they can be so relaxed that it almost feels like they're just on the edge of going to sleep. And the reason why that's important is because when you are in that state, or if you can get to that state, then you are more invested in increasing what we call the alpha waves of your brain. And that helps you relax more so. That gets you into your relaxation response, as opposed to what we call beta brain waves, which keeps the thinking and the consciousness going. And so the idea is once you get in that state in between there, then when it comes to the guided practice, it invites you to be into being rather than thinking, so that you can practice being fully present in the moment with whatever you may be experiencing in the guided meditation. So for example, one of the beauties of iRest Yoga Nidra is that it divides in this 10-step protocol, it divides a focus on body sensations, for example. There's another session that goes just into focusing on thoughts, the thoughts that may arise in terms of connecting to being mindful and being present. There's another session that is on feelings and emotions, just noticing, or I should say sensing those particular emotions without perhaps getting caught up in them. without perhaps allowing those thoughts, especially if they're difficult emotions or difficult thoughts, to overwhelm you, or so that you identify with them, or you ignore them. It's a practice of helping you really hone in on, through this protocol, of how do I really relate to those thoughts? How do I really relate to those emotions? How do I really relate to those sensations? Or let's take chronic pain, for example. How do you relate to those? So the iRest practice, when you get in that relaxed state, for some people, they are able to relate, have a new relationship with that chronic pain, for example, rather than building a story, or the story that they habitually build around the chronic pain. Oh, this is killing me. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. You see what I'm saying? And therefore, to learn to be with it rather than building the story. Because once you get into that state, for some people, they are able to practice that. So why would someone be interested in iRest? I know you have some factors on your paper, but I also wanted to add that it can be helpful, and I think some of these are on there, but obviously for insomnia, people who can't sleep, people who work third shift, for example, people who deal with a lot of anxiety, people who feel burned out at work, people who feel overwhelmed, people who are just overburdened, people who are type A. They're going, doing, and they feel like I can't stop, I can't relax. Even to try to relax, they can't relax, because relaxing might be still eating or doing something else or looking at TV. I mean, they just like, I can't relax. If you've ever said that to yourself, or you know someone else who has said that, I just can't relax. So that's the essence of iRest Yoga Nidra. And it gets a little complex. That's why I wanted to explain the difference between Yoga Nidra, which is the ancient form that iRest Yoga Nidra has borrowed from and has extended in this more modern form, specifically for people who are dealing with being overwhelmed, stressed out, depressed, anxiety, chronic pain, for example. People who can't focus. They just can't focus. They're distracted all the time. So on that note, you are welcome, if you'd like, to participate in a small practice of iRest. I mentioned that in that protocol, there's a focus on sensation, specifically on that, and that's the invitation for today, is to focus in, if you want to, on the sensations that you may be experiencing in this present moment, right here, right now, in this space. Because at the end of the day, this is all that we have. We don't have the future. We don't have the past. I'm not saying those things don't impact us, but we don't have them. All we really have is the essence of what you are experiencing in this moment of your life that will never, ever be exactly the same as it is now. So you are welcome to come to a form that is most useful for you, and perhaps a form that you may want to explore that will allow your body to be as at ease as possible. Now, if you cannot do that, if that's difficult for you, that is okay. Just do whatever is useful for you. And as you may be shifting into a particular form that may be more at ease, you might begin to notice your external world in terms of sensory experiences, this field of sensation that may be all around you in this space. In terms of sound, what sounds are you sensing? Perhaps temperature, You may be feeling some coolness, maybe warmth, or maybe something else. No judgment, just perhaps observing and witnessing your external experience. Perhaps noticing your internal experience, if you'd like. Bringing your awareness, if you want to your lips. And exploring your lips, that part of your body that is with you all the time. What might you be sensing with your lips? And then maybe your right cheek. Do you feel anything with your right cheek? Maybe and maybe not. Perhaps your left cheek. What might you welcome? Left cheek. And then moving, if you'd like, to your forehead. There's a lot of territory on your forehead. Could be the middle of your forehead, maybe between your eyebrows, the right side, left side. Do you witness anything that you may be sensing in your forehead? The top of your head, the very crown of your head. Perhaps experimenting with bringing your awareness and your attention to the crown of your head and just perhaps sensing what might be there, if anything. The back of your head. Moving to your right ear. There's the external ear and the internal ear. And if you want to, shifting your attention to your opposite ear, on the left side. And then what might it be like, if you want to explore your entire head? Just noticing from your face to the sides of your head, to the back, to the crown. And then as you're ready, you're welcome to bring your awareness back to this space in your own time. So that was just a little mini practice, somewhat similar to the body scan that is in mindfulness-based stress reduction too. And it is predicated to help you in a practice hone your attention. Bring your attention to the present moment. And then whatever you are sensing, whatever you are witnessing in that present moment, to be with it rather than to judge it, to dissociate from it, dismiss it, or to get captivated up into it or build a story around it. Can we just be with it? Okay. So I'm going to switch gears to the second practice that I teach. I've been teaching for quite a while, and we just had our last session this past spring, 8-week session of mindfulness mindful self-compassion, excuse me. And I want to tell you that this particular practice and program was built by Christopher Germer and Kristen Neff. Has anyone heard of them? Okay, a few people have. Okay. Has anyone practiced mindful self-compassion? Okay, all right. One or two people have as well. Well, to tell you about this particular practice, it combines the first word there, mindful, mindfulness, with compassion, and not just compassion, but self. There's many of us that might have compassion for other people, but for some of us it can be difficult. It can be quite a challenge to have compassion for ourselves. Because what does that mean, to have compassion for either somebody else or for ourselves? Well, according to mindful self-compassion literature, compassion and self-compassion in particular, since we're focusing on that, is about mindfulness. It is also about understanding that it is composed of common humanity, that we all experience pain in this life. There's no one who gets through life without pain and suffering. Then there's also kindness, that it can be difficult for some of us to turn the compassion that we may extend to others, and especially some of us who may be caregivers in particular, people who are taking care of children, aging parents, working with clients, for example, in a professional way. So constantly giving out compassion to others, but little coming back towards self. So that's the crux of what this particular 8-week program is about, is for us to learn how to be more compassionate and be kinder to ourselves, and to realize we're not alone. We're not alone, because it's so easy to feel when we're hurt, when we're struggling, when we have negative thinking about ourselves, when we're being critical of ourselves. It's so easy to feel like it's just me. It is just me. I'm all alone. Nobody else in the world feels this way. But to understand that, no, we're not alone. We all feel this way, and it's part of what connects us as humans too. And that it takes mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, to recognize what we're experiencing, and then the self-compassion piece can help us learn to relate to that difficult feeling, difficult thought, difficult situation in a way that is more discerning, more wise, more kind to ourselves. So that is generally what it's about. They call self-compassion the one of the wings of the bird. The bird needs to fly, but you have to have the one wing for mindfulness, and you got to have the other wing for compassion as well in order to really fly. So, and then some people use the metaphor of dancing, like partners. You got to have this partner to dance the steps well, and so mindfulness and compassion as well. So there's a little exercise that I'd like to invite you to do. How's my time, though? I wanted to make sure. I know I'm probably running. Okay. Okay. A little exercise, and you're invited to do this. If you don't want to do it, it is totally okay. You may just want to listen, and that's all right too. So your choice, your choice. But a little exercise in mindful self-compassion. So the invitation is to turn your palms up and draw into a fist, and then a tight fist for about 20 seconds, really pull it in tightly. And notice perhaps how that feels. Almost 20 seconds, just a little bit more. All right, and then release. How did that feel? What did you observe from doing that in terms of feeling, sensation? What was that like for you? Say it again. Liberating. Okay. What else? What? It hurt. Okay. Anybody else? Wasn't breathing. Okay. Felt a tightness. Okay. So not just here in the fist, throughout your body. Okay. Anybody else? Wanted to stop. Okay. Anyone else? Felt strong. Okay. All right. Well, that can be a metaphor for a lot of different things, as we just heard. Some people had different observations and sensations around that, and different experiences around that. For some people, this can be tension. This can be tension. And for some people, not. Like you said, Barb, I felt strong. So it can have different metaphorical meanings. But when you pull in like this, versus, let's say, open up, if you open up your palms, just open up and just perhaps let the back of your hand rest somewhere. What does that feel like? How are you experiencing that particular gesture? Say it again. Vulnerable, okay? Relaxing. Flowing. Calm. Okay, see, again, we can have different experiences around these gestures. And for some people, it's calm, and some people, it may not be calm. Some people, for me, it felt open, for example. So it's just to say that sometimes we can use certain gestures that may be meaningful to us, that could be meeting a need to help us be more compassionate with ourselves. There's some gestures that may not be so compassionate for ourselves, and others that may be. So you're invited to participate in this very brief meditation on mindful self-compassion. And if you want to, you could also, I'll invite you to integrate a particular hand gesture that might be more compassionate. Now, it may not be this or may not be this. It might be hand on heart. For some people that may work. Other people, no, that doesn't work for me. It might be this, crossing. It might be, sometimes I will just put a hand right here. I could be at a meeting and I need a little TLC. And I'll just do this, just rub my arm like that. And for some people, touching, and even touching oneself, may not be very useful for them. And if not, you don't have to do a hand gesture. So again, it's an invitation through the meditation, okay? But if you want to bring in a particular hand gesture that may be soothing to you, because mindful self-compassion, there's one part that is all about what is soothing, what soothes my needs, what comforts me, what validates me. And there's another part that's about what protects me, what provides for me, what motivates me, what gives me strength, as you were talking about, Barb. So all of those are connected into self-compassion. It's not just, being tender. That's a part of it. But it's also sometimes being strong, being assertive when you need to be assertive, having confidence, that kind of thing. Okay? So if you are interested, you're welcome to find a particular form that feels more compassionate for your body, whatever that might be. And that is if you are participating in this practice, because you do not have to participate in it if you don't want to, and any part of it for that matter. And once you have found a form that is most compassionate for you, you're welcome to notice your breath just as it is. No need to change, just noticing, taking in the air from this space, perhaps drinking it in through your nostrils or your mouth. And if you'd like, you could follow the journey of your breath. Another option, if you don't want to notice breath, could be to notice where your palms have landed or where they are. Just sensing your palms, your hands. And you're invited to call to mind a fairly recent time when you may have, and notice my language, you may have been less compassionate with yourself or not compassionate with yourself. It may have been negative thinking. You may have been thinking, oh my God, why did I do that? That was so stupid. Shouldn't have done that. Oh God, I can't do this. This is when maybe you're kind of beating yourself up. Or maybe there was a boundary that you needed to set, and it was hard to do that. Maybe there was a time that you really needed to be more assertive about your experience, your reality, but it was tough to do it. So those are just some examples, but perhaps calling to mind, if you want to, sometime when you weren't very compassionate with yourself. And again, nothing traumatic, but something more medium between 1 and 10. If trauma is 10 and hardly anything is 1, somewhere between 3 and 6. And if you do have a particular situation when you weren't as compassionate to yourself, just call to your being whether you can feel that in your body or not. You may or may not. Because that was a moment of suffering. And that is mindfulness, to realize and to tell yourself, I'm experiencing a moment of suffering. Being with what is really happening in the present moment. And then with that particular experience, you might say to yourself, if you'd like, suffering is a part of everyone's life. The other part of mindfulness, common humanity. You are not alone in your experience of struggle, not being compassionate. And lastly, this is an invitation to bring in a hand gesture of your choice that may be compassionate, may be kind, when particular experiences arise, when they're tough, when you start to beat yourself up, negative thinking, don't feel confident, can't be assertive, don't feel strong, feel overwhelmed. And you're also welcome to come up with your own phrase of what would you say to yourself that would be compassionate? What would you want a friend to say to you when you experience not being so compassionate? And what tone of voice would be useful? What do you need? And as you're ready, we will end this practice of self-compassion. Thank you.
Is it? I need my hands to talk. I also need to stand, so. Well, I am the final speaker, so we're getting close. My name is Marla Heron, and I am also a teacher here at Midwest Alliance for Mindfulness. And we are so excited to have all of you here. This has actually been a great practice for me, so I've done my practice for the day. One of the themes as I was sitting here listening to each of the unique practices, but obviously they have some unifying themes, right? There are different facets of mindfulness when you think about a diamond or a gem, and it has all these different facets to it, right? Well, that was one of the images that I was bringing, because each of these practices has a beauty, but a little different facet to this incredible practice of mindfulness. The other theme that was brought is I heard common humanity, and that's absolutely one of the themes that runs through mindfulness, because compassion for oneself often then leads to compassion for others. Then this idea of we're not alone. I think that's one of the things that Sydney said, that when we cultivate mindfulness, cultivate compassion, we realize we're part of this great human condition that includes the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows that is this human experience. So the MBI I'm going to talk about is called Unified Mindfulness. And Unified Mindfulness is a program that was developed by a meditation teacher named Shinzen Young, and I can write his name. Anyone know Shinzen Young or heard or anything? All right. He traveled to Kansas a lot back in the 80s and 90s, so a lot of people here follow his program. Shinzen Young he's still alive. Shinzen Young is a scholar of Asian languages and culture. And one of his great contributions to the mindfulness spectrum, all of the great offerings that we have, is he studied all contemplative practices throughout the world. And because he speaks Chinese and Japanese and Spanish and Hebrew, he was able to study Zen and Vipassana, different Asian meditation practices with teachers in their native language. And so sort of the crown jewel of his years of meditation experience and teaching is he's created something that he calls unified mindfulness. And what that means is, to knowledge, he's the only person to ever do this, he has literally taken every contemplative practice currently, or as far back as we know, practiced by humans all over the world and throughout history, codified them into actually a matrix, a chart, and he has specific techniques for teaching all of them. So it's called unified mindfulness because he has unified all contemplative practices known to humanity. Took him 50 years. He's also modernized them because we teach secular mindfulness here. His techniques and his, he calls it the universal library for training attention. So we're training our attention, and he has developed many, many techniques based on every contemplative practice known to man. So it's a pretty impressive feat. Don't be afraid. The other thing he also tells us is it only takes one practice. Sometimes we get overwhelmed. Oh, should I go to MAM or should I go to a religious? Should I do self-compassion? Should I do MBSR, right? Sometimes it gets a little confusing, and that's why the charts were created for you to sort of help you make that decision. And then also go with your heart, go with your inner wisdom. Which one of these speaks to you right now? Or what need do you have that you're like, yeah, that's what it is. Go with that one, because every one of these techniques, and including the 60 that Shinzen has, will all cultivate mindfulness and compassion. So don't let the buffet of offerings overwhelm you. Go with what seems right and try it. So yes, he has 60 techniques, but don't be afraid. Oh, this way? Okay. One of the characteristics of Shinzen's teachings and unified mindfulness is he is not only a scholar in languages, he's also a mathematician. So his techniques have been described as an algorithm for mindfulness. Sometimes, is it okay?
That's just under the light, so it's very reflective.
Okay. Okay. So sometimes, for some people, mindfulness techniques aren't concrete enough. And you're like, oh, I can sort of feel the body. But if you really want either an algorithm for how to do this, or sometimes we call it paint by numbers, it's a very specific set of techniques. The other benefit is these techniques are extremely helpful with bringing your practice into your daily life. So like all the other practices, we practice formally. We take time and we say we're going to practice now. But these techniques are extremely portable. They're very easy to use in your daily life, in your interactions with your kids, or you're driving your commute to work. So that's the other aspect that I really appreciate. I took my first teachings with Shinzen about 20 years ago, and they really struck me as what worked for me. So very quickly, in unified mindfulness, we cultivate 3 basic skills. All humans have these abilities. These are natural abilities that we all have. It just is that nobody ever told you, oh, by the way, did you know you have these and you can cultivate these skills? And when you cultivate them, you get greater mindfulness and then all of the benefits that we've talked about. In unified mindfulness too, he helps with physical pain, emotional pain, stress, but it is also a way, if you're interested in secular contemplative practice, if you're just interested in, yeah, I want a spiritual practice that is secular, this is it as well. So the first skill that you cultivate is concentration, which is the ability to be with what's occurring in the present moment, to focus the mind. As all of the exercises you've done, part of that was cultivating mindfulness, cultivating the concentration of mindfulness, so you feel less scattered. The second one is sensory clarity. So think about this. Everything you experience in your whole life is through the senses. So your entire human experience is experienced through sense gates. And in mindfulness, the mind, the thinking mind, is considered a sense. So we have more than 5 senses. We have what we see, hear, feel, touch, but we also have the thinking mind, those mental talk, and the emotions in the body. So unified mindfulness is also characterized by sometimes calling dividing and conquer. So sensory clarity means you become so good at detecting each of your states one time first. Like if you focused on the breath, that's a feel sense gate. And this is how you deconstruct your stressful or your painful experiences. When we feel overwhelmed or we feel stressed out, it's because we're seeing things, we're hearing things, our body's reacting physically, maybe tensing, and then our emotions are erupting, and it makes it all tangled. Well, in sensory clarity, what we do is we untangle each of those sensory experiences one at a time. We deconstruct them, and then we're able to observe, we're able to explore each of those senses one at a time. And that's a place of great wisdom, great insight, and empowerment to truly deeply understand. Then the third one is equanimity, which we've talked about that before. Essentially, the ability to accept what is occurring if you can't change it. So of course, if the house is on fire or someone is being abused, you absolutely need to intervene, right? But in cases where you can't change something, you're stuck in a room that's too cold or too hot and you can't get up and leave, bringing equanimity to the body. Okay, I'm going to deeply experience physical discomfort. This is a great exercise in Kansas, right? Because in July, you can't escape humidity, and I relax and feel, where do you feel the hottest first? Where are you sweating first? And then come January in Kansas, right? We contract and we're freezing and we hate it, and we're making a story. Why am I living here? This is the worst place to live. Why didn't I choose to go to Florida when I had the chance, right? Equanimity is opening to those discomforts of life that you can't change. So these are the 3 skills, and we say in unified mindfulness, C, C, and E. You bring as much concentration, clarity, and equanimity to each moment. How am I doing on time? Okay. Okay. We will do it super quick. All of you know about getting in the posture, get comfortable or get uncomfortable, whatever it feels by this time. You're like, I can't get comfortable anymore on these seats. We'll do it fast. Most stuff in unified mindfulness is a grid. All right, so we're going to practice 6 sense gates. The see in, the see out, the hear in, the hear out, the feel in, and the feel out. So we will do it right now. And I bet we can do it in 2 minutes. This is a sprint. So y'all know how to be ready. So we're all ready. So bringing the eyes closed if that feels comfortable. and beginning with C in. First, locate the mental screen inside of your head, if there is one. This is the mental screen where images occur. We might call it the mind's eye. It's usually behind the eyes. So focus there, and I invite you to bring to mind a favorite pet, or a favorite grandparent, or something pleasant. Maybe what you're going to have for lunch. You may notice on the CN experience that for most of us, if there is an image, it's generally sort of fuzzy and it comes and goes. So if you're bringing up a pet or a grandparent or food, check in with the feeling body, the emotion in the body. Does the picture of your cute little animal trigger anything in the body that's you would describe as emotion? If not, that's fine. You also might try smiling as you're thinking of someone or something you love. For most people, most of the time, the feeling in the body, the emotion is below the neck. And now we're going to do a here in. So in the mind, repeating a word or phrase that's positive in nature, very self-compassion, perhaps some kindness that you've said to yourself. It can be a word like love or peace, or it can be may I be happy, or it can be associated with your pet or grandparent, I love you. And just repeat those words in mental talk space. For most people, most of the time, mental talk space is somewhere between the ears or at the ears. Repeat the word or phrase for just a moment in mental talk space. Next, notice if when you repeated the word or phrase, did the image of the person or the animal also appear? Sometimes mental images appear at the same time as mental talk. Sometimes they don't. And just check it out as you're repeating the word. Do mental images also occur? And then letting go of that. The feel out has to do with the way the body feels, not emotional. So bringing awareness to the entire body, perhaps. The entire body, and feeling it from the inside. Noticing any sensations inside, like the belly or the chest. And then noticing any sensations, the feeling body on the outside. The temperature of the room. If your body is a little tired from the way you're sitting. And then finally, let's try the see out experience. This is where one opens the eyes, and you have two choices. You're going to focus on just seeing. So you can look around the room and just explore what you see, the ceiling, the grains in the floor, anything. And all you're doing is seeing. And then the other way to practice just see, which is a restful state, is gazing either in front of you, or if you can see the lovely moon behind Tracy. Gazing at one thing, either the moon, a grain of the floor, a fingernail, anything sort of in front of you, and let the eyes relax around the eyes. And then let the gaze soften. And keep the eyes still. Just stay with whatever focus object for just a few more moments. See if you can detect any restful feeling in the eyes. And since our eyes are open, we can let go. So that was our sprint through see, hear, feel, in, out. So I teach the Unified Mindfulness course, and it has this would be the basic, but then we do different exercises with music, and yeah, so a lot of other interesting things. I also teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, which is also what Eric and Sydney are teaching for folks who identify as male this fall. And I appreciate your coming, and I look forward to perhaps seeing you more here.
So thank you all for coming, and especially for being patient. We took a little bit more of your time than we intended to. We're going to stay for some Q&A for those who might have questions, but if you need to move on with your day, feel free to do that. We just ask that you maintain some silence in the middle part of the suite. And also, as promised, all of you who participated and signed in will be emailed a special discount code in case you'd like to take one of the MBPs. So I'm going to turn off my recording now so we can go into the Q&A.